Revive family, it's Michael here. Hope everyone is doing well. Just a quick reminder that we are still doing our Revive Zoom meetings every other Saturday. We'll go ahead and put the date for the next one on the screen. Hope you can join us. For this week's devotional, I just wanted to dive right in and start by reading a passage from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, starting in verse 41. It says this: Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts. But a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." Now, if you've grown up in church, chances are you've heard this passage before, most likely in the context of a sermon about giving or tithing, and usually the main takeaway being something like, how might we be like the widow? How can we give sacrificially, or something like that? And that's fine. I think we can go there with this passage. But if we read just a few verses earlier, we get some important context that might clue us in to what Jesus had in mind when he was making this observation to his disciples. So I'd like to read those verses for us now. So starting in verse 39, so just 2 verses prior, it says this: "As he taught, Jesus said, 'Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely.'" And so Jesus is denouncing these teachers of the law, these religious leaders, and then immediately looks to the temple treasury and points out a poor widow who comes and gives all that she has. Notice that in his denouncement of these religious leaders, he says that they devour widows' houses, and then points to a widow that is, as he is speaking, putting in her livelihood into the temple treasury, which is, of course, controlled by religious leaders. So why is Jesus doing this? Why is he saying this? See, I think it's not necessarily to uphold this widow as an example of how we should be generous, although that's a fine lesson to take. Instead, I think Jesus is pointing this out as an example, as proof of what these teachers of the law are doing to the poor in their society. You see, in the Old Testament, there are mandates to take care of widows and orphans and those who are powerless in their society. And Jesus is saying that these religious leaders are doing the exact opposite of that. They're devouring widows' houses. And so for us, this has implications around what the takeaway is for me. Maybe instead of asking the question, how might we be like the widow, we need to be asking the question, how might we be like the teachers of the law, participating and taking part in a system and in structures that favor the rich and powerful and prey on the needs of the weak and the poor and the marginalized in our society. Now, I point this out for a couple reasons. One is, I think it's easy for a lot of us, myself included, to read the Bible and make it very individualistic, right? What does this passage mean for me? What does it say about me? Instead of thinking a little bit more broadly about what does this mean for our world? What does this say about society? So that's one thing. But then secondly, more broadly, I want to say that, each of us has our own point of view, our own perspective. And that's shaped by our history, our background, our cultural heritage, our prior experiences, and all of that influences how we interact with the world and even how we interpret the Bible. And the danger comes when we assume that our point of view, our perspective, is the only one, or is the normal one, or is the one that is the majority. You see, we live in a world of diversity. God created this world with a diverse range of creatures and people and thoughts and opinions. And so much of the beauty of life comes when we can appreciate the diversity all around us. That there's going to be people that have stories that are quite similar to ours and stories that are vastly different than ours. And now more than ever, I think it is important for us to seek to understand how our individual story fits into the context of the broader story of humanity. And this is difficult, but one of the first things we can do is actually take a critical look at our own lives and acknowledge and recognize the things that have shaped us. It could look something like this. For me, it's being able to recognize that I grew up with an intact family. I grew up with this tracheotomy tube that has impacted my breathing and my voice and has had implications around what kinds of physical activities I can take part in. I grew up in this Japanese American church, this Free Methodist church, that while I am Japanese American, a lot of my friends growing up were Caucasian and Hispanic, that I was able to go to UCLA for college and USC for grad school, neither of which I had to pay for. And now I'm working in the private sector with colleagues that are highly educated. All of that is part of my background and is really just the surface level of it. But even just that, thinking about those things, I can then ask the question, and how does that impact how I interact with the world around me? Could it be that because I've never really had to worry about money in my life, that I'm more prone to think about this story of the widow and her offering as being a story about how much money I should be given to church, rather than what part I have to play in a broken society? Now, obviously, this is not just a random topic that I wanted to share about. We all know that our country right now is facing and being confronted with very important and difficult issues to discuss and engage with. Things around racial inequality, our rights and freedoms under the Constitution, and the kinds of institutions and systems that are around us and impact our everyday life. And with the tragic events that have happened in the past few weeks, it can be easy to want to disengage, to want to turn away from these things. But I want to urge our community to continue wrestling with them, to continue engaging. These are important things that we need to be talking about as the people of God. But as we do, we need to do so understanding and recognizing that we're bringing our own perspective to the situation. And it's only when we are able to sit down and have respect and understanding for the other points of view in the room that we can truly see the full picture of what God is wanting to do in our world today. And so let's own our stories. Let's listen and respect and honor the stories of those that are different from us. And let's each of us take our part in the transforming work that God wants to do in our world. Let's challenge each other and let's give grace to each other with courage and with humility. Grace and peace to you, my friends.